Chapter 28. The Last Ember. The Inferno was not merely a fire, it was a living, breathing entity of pure destruction. It roared with a voice of its own, a deafening, crackling bellow that drowned out the howling wind and the relentless drumming of the heavy rain now beginning to fall. In the sky where Vargoth was trapped with Emily, the heart of the church had become a churning sea of orange and gold, the pews and tapestries offering themselves as sacrificial fuel to the ravenous beast. The air itself was a weapon, thick and suffocating, infused with a foul, acrid smoke that clawed at the lungs and stung the eye. This was no simple byproduct of combustion. It was the very breath of the conflagration, a toxic miasma that twisted into dark, choking clouds, blotting out the stars and the memory of clean air. Silhouetted against the violent, dancing flames, Vargoth was a figure torn from a primordial nightmare. The intense heat washed over him in palpable waves, a searing force that baked the ancient, scarred scales plating his back and shoulders. It was a familiar discomfort, a sensation he had endured for centuries, a constant companion to the infernal power that fueled his existence. Yet now it was amplified, pushed beyond the threshold of mere annoyance into the realm of genuine agony. Each tongue of fire that licked at the air seemed to seek him out, the thermal energy soaking into his hide, cooking the flesh beneath. But this physical torment was a fleeting nuisance, a minor sting compared to the relentless, maddening pressure anchored to his back. Emily still clung to him. She was no longer just a woman, but a manifestation of pure, tenacious will, a parasite of vengeance that had burrowed into his hide and refused all attempts at dislodgement. Her arms were vices around his thick neck, her legs locked around his torso with a strength born of absolute desperation. Her nails, short and broken, dug deep into the scarred flesh of his shoulders, finding purchase in old wounds and creating new ones. Her determination was an unyielding force, a constant grinding pressure that persisted even as the chaos of the collapsing church clawed at the fraying edges of his control. She was his shackle, his tormentor, the physical embodiment of the humanity that had finally, irrevocably risen against him. A roar of pure, undiluted fury tore from Vargoth's throat, a sound that was less a word and more a seismic event, a desperate, primal scream that ripped through the cacophony of the fire. "Get off, you bitch! Kill!" The words were a savage promise, a final declaration of his ingrained nature. He strained against her impossible grip, the colossal muscles in his back and shoulders bulging and knotting, his powerful frame twisting and bucking in a violent effort to throw her from him, to send her spinning down into the fiery maw below. But Emily's hold was as unyielding as a stone gargoyle's, a death grip forged in grief and hardened in the fires of retribution. Every primal instinct within him screamed for flight, demanded escape from the burgeoning inferno that threatened to consume its creator. The heat was becoming untenable, the structural groans of the church a dire warning of imminent collapse. Yet she was the anchor, the immovable object that tethered him to the very hell he had so meticulously crafted, the architect trapped in his own blazing design. With a terrifying, unstoppable force, she was dragging him, step by resisting step, downward, deeper into the heart of the flames, into the deepest, most intense heat of the church. In the distance, beyond their deadly fight, the world was ending in a symphony of destruction. The guttural, wrenching groans of collapsing wood and stone were periodically swallowed by the sudden torrential downpour that had finally broken from the heavens. The rain lashed down with a newfound ferocity, a relentless, cold drumming that created a bizarre and hellish paradox. Steam hissed and exploded where water met flame, and the smell of wet ash and scorched stone filled the air, blurring the line between the firelit nightmare and the storm's promise of salvation. It was a race between two elemental forces, and Vargoth and Emily were caught directly in the breach. Inside the burning nave, away from the monstrous struggle on the balcony, the last embers of hope flickered weakly around Zoe and Anna. The air was marginally clearer near the shattered main doors, but it was still a choking blanket of smoke and heat. With every ounce of their remaining strength, a synergy of terror and love, they hoisted the limp, unconscious body of Jake between them. His head lolled against Zoe's shoulder, his life force ebbing precariously, each shallow breath of victory against the suffocating atmosphere. "Keep going," Anna barked, her voice shredded and raw with an urgency that brooked no argument. She pushed Zoe forward, using her own body as a shield against the church's grasping fiery tendrils that reached for them from the crumbling walls. They staggered, tripping over debris, their world narrowed to the goal of the open doorway and the cleansing rain beyond. But as Anna herself reached the threshold, her foot crossing from the hellish orange light into the relative darkness of the stormy night, her eyes were drawn upward. There, silhouetted against the raging fire behind him, was the grotesque, towering shadow of Vargoth. He was the demonic titan forged in flame and rage, a monstrous chiaroscuro of light and dark, his form writhing against the immense figure of Emily, clinging to his back. The sight sent a jolt of pure ice-cold fear through her veins. Even in what seemed like his final moments, he was a constant, terrifying reminder of their absolute vulnerability, a nightmare made flesh that refused to die. "Zoe, we have to hurry," she screamed, her voice cracking, not just from smoke but from sheer, undiluted terror. Zoe, gasping for breath that wouldn't come, pulled Jake's dead weight closer against her chest, her arm muscles screaming in fiery protest. She could feel the heat of the floor through the soles of her shoes. "I can't leave him. Just go," she yelled back, her defiance a thin shield over her own consuming fear. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that time was a shrinking commodity, slipping from their grasp like fine sand through clenched fingers. Every second they delayed was a gamble with a fate worse than fire. But she wasn't going to let anything happen to him. Not after everything. Not after everyone they had already lost. Her eyes, stinging and blurred, scanned the chaotic scene outside, searching for the one person who had made this desperate rescue possible. A silent prayer, a farewell, and a benediction formed on her lips, carried away on the scorching wind. "Be safe out there, Emily, wherever you are," she whispered, the words a secret for her sister alone, before she finally mustered the strength to lunge forward, dragging Jake with her, out of the church and into the drenching, liberating rain. Outside, the storm had escalated into a biblical deluge. The rain, which had begun as a gentle patter, now slammed down with the ferocity of a wrathful God, a solid sheet of water that drenched the earth in seconds and churned the ground into a slick, sucking mud. It was in this tempest that a desperate, macabre ballet of life and death was unfolding high above on the fragmenting balcony. Emily and the creature, locked in their fatal embrace, swayed precariously above the inferno. The rain did little to douse the flames beneath them, but plastered Emily's hair to her face and soaked her clothes, making her grip even more slippery and the struggle even more perilous. As if sensing his impending absolute doom, feeling the searing heat beginning to cook the scales on his underside, Vargoth's last vestiges of sanity finally snapped. The cunning, ancient intelligence in his eye was extinguished, replaced by the deranged glimmer of a cornered animal. His eye was wide, bloodshot, the blood irises surrounded by a network of dark, jagged blood vessels. Reason was gone. Only the base instinct to kill, to destroy the source of his pain, remained. In a final desperate act of malice, he twisted his enormous head on his thick, muscular neck, his jaws gaping wide to reveal rows of serrated, iron-coated teeth. With a speed that belied his size, he lunged toward the figure on his back, aiming to clamp down on her arm, her neck. Anything to tear her apart, to sever this intolerable connection. But Emily, fueled by a resolve that had been building inside her for a lifetime, compressed into a single night, was not deterred. The sight of those teeth coming for her face only hardened her will. With a surge of fierce, adrenaline-fueled strength, she did not try to evade. Instead, she leaned into it, pulling him downward with all her might, using his own lunge to add momentum. Dragging them both another crucial step deeper into the flames, now roaring through the building. Agony, blinding and searing, exploded in her forearm as his teeth met their mark. He bit down with monstrous force, the pressure immense, the pain a white-hot brand that shot up her nerve endings. She felt the sickening sensation of skin and muscle tearing, the crunch of bone protesting under the pressure. Warm, sticky blood immediately welled up, a shocking contrast to the sudden chill of the rain washing over the wound. A scream was torn from her lips, swallowed by the roar of the fire. She fought against the iron clamp of his jaws, trying to pry herself free from the vicious bite. But his wrath was unbridled, his focus absolute. In this moment of pure rage-fueled vengeance, however, Vargoth overlooked a more perilous, more immediate threat. His cape's massive right wing, already grievously damaged from the lightning strike that had hit him, had drooped low during the struggle. A rogue spark, carried on a superheated updraft, found purchase on the compromised membrane. There was a faint whoosh, barely audible, and then a line of fire raced along the wing's edge. A sensation entirely new to the ancient monster erupted in his mind. Not pain, but a severe, overwhelming wave of pure, unadulterated horror. It was the visceral terror of a bird seeing its wing aflame. The fundamental understanding that its means of escape, its very identity, was being devoured. The fire began to consume the leathery material with terrifying speed, the acrid smell of burning hide joining the melange of scorched wood and stone. It was a reckless, irreversible moment, the catalyst for a final spiraling plunge into oblivion. Their balance, already teetering on the edge, was lost. The weight of the burning wing, the sudden panic jerk of Vargoth's body, and Emily's relentless pull created a perfect storm of downfall. Together, still locked in their deadly embrace, Vargoth alongside Emily with her arms choking his neck, they plummeted downward. They fell through the weakened roof, through the floor of the ground, past blazing beams and falling debris, into the fiery heart of the church, directly into the hay-pile of the inferno that had once been the main worship space. Vargoth's scream as they fell was one of pure, undiluted horror, a raw, guttural sound that was not of rage, but of a profound and ultimate fear. It was the cry of an immortal facing true termination, a sound that was instantly swallowed by the all-consuming roar of the inferno that welcomes them. And through it all, Emily clung on. Agony radiated from her bitten arm, a constant screaming pain, but it was drowned out by a determination that was colder and harder than the rain outside. Fueled by the memories of every life he had shattered, every moment of fear he had inflicted, she held on. Tonight, she would be the instrument of his end. Tonight, she would finally end this nightmare forever. She tightened her grip with her good arm, locking her hands together, a human chain of vengeance. She closed her eyes, not in fear, but in acceptance. Tears, born of pain, of relief, of a lifetime of sorrow, streamed down her cheeks, instantly evaporating in the intense heat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat counting down the final seconds. She held on, and she let the flames do their work. She let them consume the monstrous embodiment of all her fears. The fire is about to embrace them. He thrashed wildly, a beast in its death throes, trying to wrestle against the hellish blaze that was quickly consuming him. This was it, the finale. Vargoth's visage, mere inches from her own, twisted in unimaginable anguish. It was a horrifying contortion of scales and fangs, his features melting and reforming in the intense heat. A symphony of guttural growls and piercing shrieks erupted from him, a cacophony of fury, pain, and terror that dissolved into the screaming wind whipping through the ruined church, a grotesque juxtaposition of ultimate fear and a strange, perverse relief that the long, monstrous centuries were finally at an end. The fire danced hungrily, ceaselessly, and mercilessly. It was an impartial executioner. There was no escape, no last-minute miracle. The ancient evil was being unmade, reduced to its core components of ash and memory. The flames consumed him until there was nothing left to burn, leaving behind only a grotesque, smoldering outline on the floor, a fleeting, charred reminder of the terror that had plagued them for so long. As the flames licked over the last of him, a final, resonating cry tore from what remained of his form. It was not loud, but it was piercing, a haunting refrain that seemed to be woven from the very essence of his being. A sound of ultimate finality that echoed through the scorched stone bones of the church and out into the stormy night, marking the definitive, absolute end of his vile menace. Then silence, but for the crackle of the dying fire. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the flames began to abate, their fury spent. They had consumed their primary target, their reason for being. The desperate, all-consuming roar of the fire softened into a bitter, whispering crackle. The rain, unchallenged now, intensified its efforts, a cleansing torrential downpour that fell upon the smoldering remnants of the church with a purpose. It doused the flames that had once reached so desperately for the heavens, quenching them with a relentless, hissing sigh. Steam billowed upward, a thick, white fog that blanketed the ruins. The smoldering, blackened skeleton of the church became a grave. It was a burial mound not only for the memories of terror and the physical remains of a monster, but also, finally, for the seeds of healing. The crucible of their suffering had incinerated the source of the poison. Vargoth was finally, incontrovertibly, gone. The nightmare that had held them in its thrall, the shadow that had darkened every waking moment, was over. The terror he had unleashed upon them was ended, for good. The dark silhouette that had haunted the gray sky of their lives for so long faded away, its substance gone, its memory already beginning to soften at the edges, never to be seen again. The nightmare of Vargoth was finally, blessedly, over.